Thank you so much for joining Dental Marketing Theory, a podcast by Gary Bird. In today's episode, Gary talks with Char Watson, the founder and CEO of the Providers DOO. They discuss her dental journey and her thoughts about how culture eats systems for breakfast. As always, please make sure to like, subscribe, share, and leave a comment, as all of those things really help to get the word out about dental marketing theory. Hope you enjoy today's show.
All right, Char, we are live. Thanks so much for coming on with us today.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me, Gary.
So full disclosure, earlier today, I was on Char's podcast. So she had me on, and then a couple hours later, we're coming right back around to do mine. So I really enjoyed the process of being on your podcast today. And I'm excited to share with listeners what you do and how you do it, and kind of what you're bringing to the dental industry. And one of the things that we start off with is we go into how people got into the dental industry. So I'd love for you to just share how you got into the dental industry, how you got hooked in, and then where you're at now in your business.
Yeah, sure. So like many others, I didn't join the dental industry on purpose. It was kind of an accident. I was actually en route to get my RN. I was going to school. I was working as a medical assistant. And then this was about 2010. My husband got laid off. It was during the recession time. And so we had to move for his job, but I couldn't find a position in the medical field. So I joined a small dental practice, and I started as the receptionist. And then they had me move up to the account manager, and I was there with them for about 2 years. And during that time, I just got my feet just wet enough that I really enjoyed it. So I was like, oh, I guess this is what I'm going to do. So I stopped pursuing my RN and actually kind of stopped doing school altogether since the pubs was going. And then joined another practice in 2012. And I would say this is where I really learned the ropes, the operations, really finessed my skill sets. So I started with him in 2012. When I started, the practice honestly was upside down. It wasn't in good shape at all. The accounts were horrible. There wasn't good systems and processes in place. The culture sucked. Like, it was just awful. So in about 6 months' time, I turned it around really well. And so he promoted me to office manager. So it was kind of an accidental thing. I wasn't really sure if I was going to stay. And then all of a sudden I got moved up to office manager. So I was like, well, I guess this is it. I'm going to do this full force. So 2015, he merged with another practice in the community. And his practice was in worse shape than the first practice. And even with culture and systems, it was even worse. It was a dumpster fire, to say it politely. So and throughout like a year's time, we got things situated. We got, team turnaround happened. Systems were put in place. Found out I was pregnant, and
Wow.
decided to be done. During that time, that year-long period, working with merging the other practice and then fixing all the systems, I was still handling so much of the operations. So I wasn't just doing office management. I was doing account management, and I was doing treatment coordination, and I was doing HR. I was doing so many things. And so by the time our second baby came, I was just like, I'm burned out. I'm going to take a break. I don't know if I can keep doing this. So turned in my notice, and he called me about 6 months later and said, hey, so sorry, I turned off.
No, you're fine.
Called me about 6 months later and said, hey, can you come back? And I was really hesitant. Like I said, the culture wasn't good. I was really burned out. I just had our second baby. My first one was only about 24 months, so about 2 years old. So I decided to come back part-time. But he had another office manager there at that time. So we were kind of, splitting it equal. And she worked half the time, and I did too. And then he just decided he didn't want her to work there anymore. He didn't like the way that she worked. They were out of sync. Didn't feel like that he was able to grow. And so he asked me to be full-time. So I did step in full-time. But when that happened, though, he didn't communicate with that office manager what he wanted, his expectations, what wasn't working, what was working. There was no communication there. And so when I came in full-time, it was a complete shock to her, because he was supposed to communicate that with her. And so she kind of just got kicked out, and I hated that. And that should have been my red flag, but I didn't take it like that. So stuck with it. And, you know, things just kind of kept progressing in that downward spiral from there. We decided to open a second location. And so suddenly I was over 2 locations. And again, dumpster fire situation, opening up that second practice.
Was it a de novo or a acquisition?
It was acquisition, I guess, kind of de novo in a way, though, because it was a dead practice. It had been sitting for about 3 years. So the location was there. There were patients, but they hadn't been seen for about 3 years. So I guess, a mix of both.
Yeah. So
opened up the second location, and that's like when things really started to get hairy, I guess is the nice way to put it. When I was meeting with him, we would make decisions, and when I would go to the second location, he would completely do the opposite of what we decided on. And so I felt like I was constantly between a rock and a hard place. You know, we'd make a decision that was strategic, that was tactical, was addressing issues, was a forward progression, and then he would just change it because he had this huge fear of not being in this command and control kind of style. It really set him back. The other problem too is that the practice he had merged with, they were partners. They didn't have a true partnership. And so I wasn't able to really communicate with that other provider either. He always only wanted me to talk to him. I wasn't allowed to have one-on-one meetings with this other provider, and nor was he invited into our meetings. And so things just started to dismantle at a really high, crazy rate. So in 2018, my husband got his notice that he would be going on the deployment that following October. And so we just kind of took that like, I think this is our sign that we need to make a shift here. We just need to be done, because I was soon going to be a single parent to 3 babies. The amount of working hours I was doing with both locations was about 60 hours. And again, I was just at that complete miserable, burned out state for a lot of reasons. So by January, I turned in my notes and I was done. And so then I decided to open up my own consulting, and I started as just doing front office training. But I always left feeling like I hadn't done enough. I didn't feel like I'd actually fixed the problems, because what I was being called in was basically system setup, and that was the biggest complaint. But there was so much more to it. And I knew that from my experience and just walking in without this biased opinion, that there was a lot that was actually missing. There was a missing structure, there was missing culture, there was missing partnership, all of it. And so when I was doing the front office training, I decided to build my own program called the Providers DOO. And it's a certification program to transition office managers into a director of operations. And so I started doing that, going into the offices, doing that. And COVID hit, and it forced everything to change, which actually came as a blessing since it forced everything to go online. So now I teach it online, and now it's more of a scalable model. So that's where I am now. It's a really long story. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's awesome. And so you, so there's lots of stuff there to unpack. So are you finding passion in what you're doing now? Like before, I imagine you felt kind of trapped. Are you feeling relieved at where you're at now? Or do you feel like, hey, we still have a lot of things to build on to what you're doing? Kind of tell us where you're at in your current state.
Yeah, no, I don't feel trapped at all. I feel like, honestly, this is such a new concept, bringing in an executive level on a small business scale. Excuse me. We see that a lot in the big group practices or in the DSOs. We recognize this position, but in the small practices, it's just a new concept. So right now, it's not that the program necessarily needs to be changed. I think it's more just getting the knowledge out there and reversing and unpacking what's been put into place for decades and decades, as far as structure, as far as systems, as far as partnerships, as far as behavior and culture, all of it. So we're talking about a big, massive movement, introducing it into the small practice spaces. So it's kind of a mix of both, not stuck, but definitely in the growth and awareness phase.
100%. Yeah. And there's not a lot there. I totally agree with you on that. So what are I know one of the things that we talked about as we were preparing for this episode is a lot of practices. So a lot of people listening right now hit a glass ceiling, right?
Mm-hmm.
And a glass ceiling is a ceiling that you hit, but you're not really sure why you're stuck there, right?
Yeah.
Kind of walk me through what you think. I have a marketing opinion on this, right? Because I see everything through a marketing lens, but I would love to hear your opinion on glass ceilings from your experiences and how you, the people that you've been working with.
Yeah. I think there's really two causes that, from my perspective, that really causes the glass ceiling. Number one is trust. We spend a lot of time, I see this again and again, and I know this is a bit, hypocritical from where I'm coming from as an external support, but we spend a lot of time in practices seeking that external support. We're constantly reaching outward to resolve the problems that we're having inward. And those typically result in, system restructure or structure, like structure as in the org structure. Excuse me, I'm sorry.
Yeah, you're
Or
good.
strategy problems.
Mm-hmm.
And they're looking for the next best strategy. But there's not a lot of trust, like real trust, one, with the provider themselves being the leader, two, with the team as a whole, and three, at scale. And so that's causing, you have fantastic consultants coming in and bringing in these amazing strategies and these amazing systems and setting up the structure how it should be, but it fails every time because there's not that trust in place. And that also brings us to the point of culture. Culture has increasingly it's increasingly caused a gap between having the same priority and the same focus as the strategies, the systems, and the structure. It's increasingly moving away from the importance. And the reason why is because it's so hard to address. It's so hard to strengthen because it just isn't tangible. And so
it's not like your revenue or your Google reviews, right? Those are, or the number of new patients that you need to get. Like that's a tangible number that you can move. And sometimes culture for certain people, they can't put their finger on it.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And so then it just gets pushed further and further away. And so when we don't have trust, so we don't have these strong relationships, and then we have a poor culture, no matter what amazing strategy comes into play, no matter what amazing consultant comes in, it will not work. It can't.
Mm-hmm.
Culture has to be the same importance as those three S's, if not more.
Got it. That's a really good point. And yeah, and you're exactly right. You cannot overcome trust because trust has to be given, right? You have to give trust. And if you've been beat up a little bit by the people who are trying to help you through that, then I can see why that might be a problem. Now, you hit on culture. So I know you have 3 different parts of culture that you break down and that you look at. Walk me through those.
Yeah. So culture, I look at it in a language because sorry. I have like this stinking cough. I'm so sorry.
No, you're totally fine. You're totally fine.
I'm sorry.
Take your time.
I was trying to not have this. I took some tea and everything before we got on, so I'm so sorry.
You're totally good.
So anyway, so language, words create our reality. So we focus on language very first. And then second, we focus on behavior because behavior models our language.
Mm-hmm.
And then last, we focus on relationships. And like I said, trust is built.
Language, behavior, and relationships.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
And trust ties back into the relationship factor.
Okay.
So when we're looking at culture in this way, it becomes very tangible and very easy to not only address, but to strengthen. We take out the complexity from it. So there's 5 different stages in culture that we look at, and each of those have different languages, different behaviors, and different relationships. And you have to be able to transcend through each of those stages because each stage pulls from the other and builds on each other. And so you can't, and I say that because a lot of times I'll see consultants come in and they kind of do this airy-fairy way of boosting up culture. We'll move away from the office. We'll talk about how good we feel about each other. We'll sing Kumbaya, and then we'll get to the strategy session. That's not actually addressing the problem. It's a really short term, trying to fix it in a very airy-fairy way because it's not really addressing the issue, and it's not changing the language, and it's not changing the behavior, and it's not really developing these relationships. And so what we really want as, for me, when I'm teaching the office managers to be director of operations, I'm teaching them to be that leader that's going to take the whole organization level up into the next level of the culture. And so they're the ones I start with. And it really starts with them having a self-assessment of where they are and how they're viewing the
And do
organization.
they have to get the doctor's buy-in, obviously, or whoever's the main owner is, or how do you do that, right? So if you have an office, how do you what's your framework on that?
Yeah. So first, like I said, first we go over the assessment. And a lot of times, a lot of practices, this is just the sad, honest truth. They're between the second and third culture stage. So the second stage is saying my life sucks. It's very siloed. There's not a lot of working relationship working in it. The third stage is saying I'm great, but you're not. So it's constantly doing this dominance factor. I'm always the one putting out fires, et cetera, right? So neither one of those are good. But to move from stage 2 to stage 3, that's where they start to develop a partnership. And so the very first place is taking the office manager to be aware of where they are individually. And then the next step is to create this partnership between the CEO and the DOO. And that helps them to bring them up to stage 3. So then after that, it's continuously building on that. So instead of working in these silos, we start putting together projects that take the whole team. So then we start developing that relationship and that trust. And instead of saying I'm great, we start saying we're great. And it's just this continual progression that happens. So it starts with the DOO and then brings in the CEO, and then eventually we'll bring in the whole team.
Got it. Awesome. And then, so if I'm a practice, or if I'm a doctor listening right now, or an owner of a DSO or something like that, how do I even begin implementing something like this?
Well, first it has to start with you, honestly. You have to get into that realization. It's called a leadership epiphany, basically. But you have to get into that realization that where you got today and you want to get to that next level, you can't play in the same playing field. It's completely different arena. And so it's really coming to that realization that what I've done to get me here is not going to get me to the next level. And so then you start building in these relationships. And by doing so, you're actually developing leaders around you. So if you're a provider of a DSO, you're going to start building these relationships, these triads, and you're going to start building these leaders, and they're going to start building their triads and their leaders, and it just keeps going outward. But the very first place has to start with you and you wanting to make that change. And so not accepting anything less than that, because as the culture changes and it really starts to optimize, it'll actually start to attract in that same level that the practice is at and repel those who are in it. So when I was in that second location, when the culture really started to shift and make that change, we had a lot of turnover for that year
Mm-hmm.
because the staff just wasn't the staff almost in a way kind of was pushing out those that didn't fit into the culture.
Yeah.
So those that were still stuck on the drama, still stuck on the backstabbing, the practice had come into a weeness, but those that were staying on the silo and wasn't willing to change, in a way they just kind of got pushed out. And
Yeah.
so the turnover wasn't a bad thing. To that note, it's not something that you can just cut off at the tail. So it's, if you identify a team member and they're struggling to level up with their culture and really step into that different arena, just firing them isn't necessarily going to fix the problem. Because if you're listening to the language and everybody's still talking about how great they are and all the things that they're doing, then you haven't actually leveled up the culture.
Got it. Okay. And then how do you tell more on so that's kind of from a higher level. And then if I move down into the office, how do I tell when somebody's ready to be able to move from a position and move more into the leadership position?
Meaning like the office manager moving into like a director of operations role.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So there's 6 signs that I have that I really like the providers to keep an eye out, but also for the office manager too, because I feel like it seems like there seems to be a cross section between when the office manager is like, I'm ready to level up, I'm ready to change. The practices hit their glass ceiling, and so really everybody's ready for the next stage. So there's signs that lead up to that. So the first one is that the office manager values responsibility and not the reward, meaning that they're taking tasks to progress the office without seeking, everybody's recognition from what they've done.
Mm-hmm.
The second one is that they see the big picture and that they hold on to the vision and the mission of the practice. So they take a management level of really making sure that that vision and that mission are succeeding and making sure that everybody understands what's happening here together collectively. So they're moving more as a groupness and they're seeing things at a 360 view rather than just the immediate next step that we're taking or the goal that we're working on. They see it much bigger than that. And then the next one is that open communication. they're creating that open communication channel with the team members. A lot of cultures or a lot of practices that come in, there's not a lot of open communication between the team to the
Mm-hmm.
CEO or team to the office manager. And so if the office manager is really trying to implement that into the culture and really trying to create a collaborative platform, that's showcasing that they're ready to they want to take the team to the next level because they care about the values and the strengths of their team members, which leads us to the next sign that the office manager is seeing the strengths of their team members and they're really honing in on those skills and wanting them to develop and wanting them to be a part of doing more with the practice. And then the last one is that they're really being recognized as a leader. If they are not stuck in that I'm great and you're not, and they're actually wanting to work with the team members and they're sitting down to get their opinions and their views and their perspectives, that showcases a lot more than just command and control management style.
That's good. Yeah, that's a good checklist to work through and be able to identify. I'm sure it would, if I was in an office, I'd be able to really help start to work through who's going to be able to do that. Because I know I've made this mistake before, and I know others have as well. Is like, oh, you're good at that job, then I'm going to put you in over the top of that job, right? To lead
Yeah.
people. And it's
Yeah.
totally different, right? Just because you're
Mhm.
a good hygienist doesn't mean you're a good leader of hygienists. And
Mhm.
so there's definitely things you got to work through there. And I love that framework. So one of the things that we talked about is doctors as CEOs. And one thing that I've seen is like when you're a fractional CEO, right? So
Mhm.
you're practicing dentistry, and then in your spare time when you have some, you're trying to be a CEO. That
Yeah.
creates a lot of unique obstacles, and it also creates a certain environment. I'd be interested to hear how you work through that and how you navigate that, because that is, I know a lot of practices are kind of stuck in that position.
Yeah. Well, I want to take a step back to answer this question because I think it's easier if you can be able to identify what's causing it
Mm-hmm.
before trying to fix it. So, if you're looking at the four principles of business, so we're considering vision, strategy, management, and implementation, the providers are holding the top three typically. Office managers they have like a toe in management. I don't really feel like that they're fully in management. I feel like it's too much of a command and control structure. So they're just passing down what they were told to do onto the team. So
Mm-hmm.
just management. So providers are holding that vision, they're holding the strategy, they're holding the management on top of the clinical care. And so that gets them to a burned out stage incredibly fast. And that also starts to bring in the obstacles, like you said, but it starts to create these gaps too. And so there's not there's not a lot of progression that happens. It kind of becomes this hamster wheel, and these silos are developed because everybody's miserable. And so, for providers, the way to work on this is really to find your strategic partner. And that's why having the office manager transition to director of operations, that's what becomes of that. So then the director of operations can take the strategy, they can take the management, and they have the team underneath them for the implementation. And so, transitioning them into this higher role and then transitioning out the provider of all of those different principles, now they're able to really step into that visionary role and the practitioner. And so it doesn't feel so overwhelming. And so then they start to really be able to, build these relationships, not these transactional relationships. And I think that that's kind of what tends to happen is it employers to employees is viewed as transactional and it really needs to be relational. And
Mm.
if you're not in the silo, you can see that and you're starting
Yeah.
to develop that.
Wow. Okay. So that's good, because it's that's normally the dentist is like, well, I want to be the visionary, right? And so, but
Mhm.
they're not available all the time because they're practicing dentistry. So
Yeah.
I appreciate that point of view big time. So one of the things that you said earlier, and I think you've kind of lived this out through um through your experiences, is that culture eats systems for breakfast.
Yeah. It
What do
does.
you what do you think? What do you so if I come in and I have the most amazing systems, but my culture's not set up, then I'm toast. But if I come in and I have amazing culture and maybe not so great systems, things will pan out. Is that
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. If you have a filling culture and you have the most amazing system or the most amazing strategy in place, it cannot succeed because the team won't execute on it. They have no commitment to it. And so it doesn't matter how amazing those systems are, how amazing the strategy is, or the great structure you have in place even. If you don't have a strong culture, it's going to fail every time. But if you have a strong culture, that means that everybody's coming together in this we-ness, in this groupness, and they all are pulling towards the same mission. You can have a half-assed strategy that can succeed much better than that amazing strategy with the failing culture, because everybody's working together and everybody's rowing in the same direction. Everybody's in alignment. So culture absolutely eats strategy for breakfast, eats systems for breakfast. It has to be top priority for you to be able to have the success in growing and scaling your practice.
So that's where you start. Is you just
Yeah,
start that the culture
just
side.
start
Got it.
there.
Got
Yep.
it. Okay. And then tell me, how do you, so let's say you have a doctor that's like, okay, my culture stinks. I have some systems, but my culture's getting just eating it up. And so I want to fix that, and I'm willing to get some help. What are some key KPIs that they need to fundamentally start with to really build that up?
Well, KPIs, I mean, they're an amazing metric. That's awesome, but I think that it has to come even beforehand.
Okay,
As
yeah,
a
walk me through
provider,
that then. So let's walk through that. So what are the things that need to happen right now, right? As I'm just realizing, oh, that's why none of my systems work no matter which one I put in, is my culture is not great. So
Mhm.
what's the steps that they need to begin to work through, and then we'll deal with the KPI question later.
Yeah. So first they need to have that they need to do an assessment. They need to have a real honest conversation with themselves of where they're at. One thing I want to note here is that the achievements that you have as the providers have made, I'm not disregarding that in any way or saying that that shouldn't be acknowledged. That's not at all what's happening. It's just that that state and that mindfulness of I'm great because I've done X, Y, and Z is what's causing the silos, because you're not allowing anybody else to be at the same level with you. So there's no collaboration, there's no we-ness, no groupness. So the very first place is to start with that self-awareness. And then the next step to take is really building that relationship. So if you're in I'm great, but you're not, so you're in that stage 3, your next thing that you want to take on is building the relationships, because your behavior is going to start changing with this too. And so one of the things I suggest is taking on a project that you alone cannot achieve, or the office manager alone cannot achieve, or the team cannot achieve. So bringing in a project that calls in the entire team to work together on is a really great next step to take. So I'm sorry, Gary. My
No,
goodness,
you're good. You're totally fine.
freaking off. Anyway, so we really want to be able to dismantle the silos and start bringing together the team on this collaborative front. And so doing a project is a really great way to get started with that. And then the next one is to start pointing people to other people for direction. So if the team is constantly coming to the office manager or constantly coming to the provider and saying, I'm having this problem, I'm having this problem, and the office manager or the provider are constantly fixing it. So this is where we're getting into the day-to-day fires. You stay in that mindset of I'm great because you're still fixing it. Instead, what you need to do is start developing the relationships between the ones that are having the problem. So if the back office is complaining about how the front office is scheduling, well, everybody wants the same outcome. Everybody wants to have a successful practice and have a great patient experience, et cetera, et cetera. You need to point them back to each other. Don't get in the middle of it. Don't tell them what they need to do. Acknowledge that both of them are having a problem and they both want the same outcome. So for them to go take the next step and to start working on it together.
Mm.
And then the next one is just to really encourage open dialogue and just really having open conversations. I don't think that there's enough transparency that happens. And I can speak from experience. When I was in the brick and mortar space, I would come to the provider saying, I'm having these problems. I don't understand how I'm supposed to be able to take care of practice 1 and practice 2 and have the communication. And I was speaking my problems, but I just kept hitting a wall because he just said, go figure it out. So we weren't having real conversations. We weren't dissecting and going through and pulling apart the issues and then coming together for a solution. And so that it's uncomfortable, but it needs to happen because that starts building that trust factor and that starts building those real relationships.
Got it. Awesome. And then, so from there, now I have some of those relationships. What to really build people up and make sure they're on the right path and I'm setting them up for success? What are some of the key KPIs that I need to list out and really start tracking, or what do you start with?
So, to answer this, I hope this is okay. Can I go through the framework that I use? Because I
Do
feel
it.
like that would
Yeah.
be okay. Okay, awesome. So this is what I do when it comes to KPIs, because a lot of times there's just not a lot of clarity of where we're going. This can be because there's too many priorities in place. The practitioner isn't really clear on the vision, et cetera, et cetera. So the framework that I use is one, I want the CEO and the DOO to come together to get clarity on the vision. So the vision is the 3 to 5 years out. And then when the practitioner is saying, I want to be able to reach XYZ goals, so then we start to develop the drivers. The next step that I want to take is I want to be able to see where they actually are phase wise, because this is where it gets gray and it gets shady. Is if we have this huge enormous goal that we want to achieve that's fitting into our 3 to 5 year vision, but the practice is actually in a lower level, in a lower phase, we can't just jump all the way to Z. We have to take the steps from A to Z to get there. So I have 3 different phases that I look at. So the first phase is business awareness, and this is where payroll and overhead expenses are at 60%, providers pays at 30, and profits at 10. So we're really focusing on business awareness. The second phase is really increasing the revenue and optimizing the patient flow. And so between payroll and overhead is at 55%, doctor pays at 30, and then profits at 15%. And then the third phase is the scaling phase. This is where we're really optimized our systems. Our culture is fantastic. Now we can copy, duplicate, and move on to a next practice. And so this is where our payroll, our operating expenses are at 50%, our overheads at 50%, or doctors pays at 30%, and then the profits at 20%.
Mm-hmm.
So I explain all that because if we have this big vision that we want to open these 2 or 3 locations, but we're actually in phase 1, the priorities there need to be at phase 1. So we need to be on that business awareness. We can't just jump and start making these drivers to push these objectives, to push these KPIs if we don't have the right phase in place to support that.
Totally makes sense.
So,
I appreciate you. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Okay, awesome. That makes sense, and I appreciate you walking us through that, because I think that's important that people understand your mindset, right? Because it's starting in a little bit different place than just saying, "Hey, track revenue or track profit."
Right.
So
yeah, exactly.
So, is there anything that I forgot to ask you, or any topics that we touched on and kind of glossed over that we should have dove into more?
I can keep going through the KPIs if you want, just explaining the framework.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if you think that's valuable, yes.
Okay. So then the next step that we want to take is we want to choose the right metric. So we really want to make sure that the metric is well defined and it's quantifiable. And we also want to be able to make sure that it's being at front with the collaboration with the team, and it can give us a feedback loop. So we want metrics. I feel like sometimes we just kind of choose, I don't know, just kind of airy-fairy ones. We're only looking at revenue, we're only looking at production, but we need to choose metrics that really support the objectives, that are supporting the drivers, that's supporting the priorities, right? So that's the next step we need to take. And then the next one is that we need to make sure that the metrics support either the initiative, so support the change that we're making, or it's supporting the optimization or addition that we already have in place. So it has to be specific to those two, because those having projects and then having changes and optimization, those are 2 different workflows. So we just want to make sure that we have the right metric to support that. And then I like to create a 3D measuring system. So I like to look at the output metric. So what is success and what is failure, and having that clearness and clarity on what that is exactly. And then 2, I like to look at the input metrics. So this is our milestones and the success metrics that we're going to be taking, that we know that we're on the right track to get to our output or our outcome metric. And then we also want to create process metrics, which are our operational, to make sure that we are ensuring the health of both the output and the input, and making sure that we're on track and that we're not compromising either one. So, and then we can have external if it's applicable. And I like to make these metrics on a quarterly basis, a 3-month basis, because any shorter than that, we just don't have enough data. And any longer than that, and we're not tweaking or changing anything, then we're just back on that hamster wheel.
Awesome. That's good. That's a lot of stuff. And I love
Sorry.
how you've thought, no, it's good. I'm glad you've thought through this, obviously, right? And you've probably lived through it and then helped people through it. So I love that. All right. So I'm going to totally change gears on you. What is your favorite marketing campaign of all time, or most
Okay,
impactful? It can't be dental.
Okay, can't be done. Okay.
Yeah.
So my secret thing that I want to do when I grow up is I've always wanted to be a mission pilot. So, like
What is that? What is a mission pilot? Is that like fighting in wars and like going in missions, or?
yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
That's like my secret, would love to do. I'll never do it because I'm a mom, so I'll never do that. But so I know it's not funny. So that's my favorite. Those kinds of commercials, when I see those, I'm like, yeah, everybody's saving everybody and they're kicking ass and doing amazing things. I want to go do that.
That's so
So
funny.
that's
How did
my
that
favorite
happen?
one.
Where did that come from?
I don't know. I saw it when I was younger, and I was just so amazed how this person came in and there's fire going on and they save somebody and then they live. And I'm just like, wow, that's amazing. This is a ginormous impact. I've always been that person that just likes to see things in a 360 view. And so seeing that person coming in and then seeing that person saved, I just was like so amazed by that. I think that might have started my initiation towards the RN route, is being in clinicals.
Yeah.
But
That
yeah.
makes sense. Awesome. And now you're a dental consultant. So
Yeah, so I'm
that's how it works.
completely online,
I
right?
wanted to be in the MBA. So, and now I do dental
I love
marketing.
it.
So
Yeah.
that's awesome. Okay. So how can people find you? If someone wants to reach out to you, get more information, talk about what you're doing, what's the best way to get in contact with you?
Yeah, they can just go online to theprovidersdoo.com. There's a couple of different areas there, to identify what you're looking for. If you want to go into the certification program, you just want a strategy session, whatever you're looking for, they can book a call right there, and then we can dive in and see if it's the right fit.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for coming on, Char. You did a great job. And I really appreciate you walking us through a lot of these frameworks.
Yeah, you bet.
Thanks.